Today in the EU rockets back into the space competition. Today, the European Union launches a rocket into space for the first time since the war in Ukraine began. The rocket, named Ariane 6, symbolizes a renewed hope that Europe will gain ground in the new space race. But the challenges ahead are plenty. Can Europe catch up? Hello and welcome. I'm your host, Giada Santana, and this is Today in the EU. To put this into perspective, let's rewind to 2004. In an interview with CNN, a young Elon Musk shared his vision for space exploration.
What I think we're beginning to see is the dawn of a new era of space exploration, but one that is driven by commercial companies as much, if not more, than by government.
Fast forward 20 years, and Musk now leads SpaceX, a company whose advanced technology drives the competition in the space economy. Even European agencies have turned to SpaceX rockets, sidelining their own European counterpart, the French-born company Ariane. However, after years of inactivity, Ariane is finally launching its new rocket. I'm here in the studio with Senne Starckx, a science journalist and writer, to discuss the significance of this launch and what it means for the future of European space competitiveness. Welcome, Senne. Today marks the inaugural launch of Ariane 6, a space rocket built by the European Space Agency. Why is it important for the European Union to send its own rockets into space?
Europe has, of course, a long track record in space. ESA, the space agency, was founded in the 70s. So basically, if you want to do activities in space, you need access. And if you want to choose what you're doing, certain amount of freedom, you want guaranteed access in space, it's best that you do that on your own.
You know, for those who are not following the topic, the space economy might sound like an outlandish and somewhat unnecessary field for the EU to compete in. How does access to space impact our daily life?
Yeah, for years, for decades actually, Europe has been on the forefront, for example, Earth observation.
And what for?
For monitoring climate, weather, globally, but also for Europe itself. And there you need satellites for. So the satellites. We also have our own navigation system, the Galileo, also needs a lot of satellites to be launched. So on these fields, Europe wants to be autonomous. They want their own navigation system. They want their own observation system from space. We need to monitor climate. We need to predict extreme weather events so that life on Earth can become safer, so that we can deal better with consequences of climate change. That is what I would see as the benefit from an institutional aspect.
Of course, there's also a commercial aspect to this, right?
Of course, the space economy is really growing fast and a lot of innovation is happening here. A lot of companies have been started up, also in Europe, which is usually not seen as a very popular place for startups in space, but also here this is happening.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of innovation, and the low Earth orbit is a field where young companies, startups can experiment, can play around, because it's becoming cheaper and cheaper to launch small satellites even to space. So it's really a very vibrating part of economy. Space is becoming a more and more normal economic sector, you could say. And like in other economic sectors, Europe has a place in there.
Right, of course. And what is Europe's current standing in the space market and the space economy?
Traditionally, Europe has had a quite strong position. That means on the transport of unmanned spacecraft, like satellites, big telescopes. So if you look at the charts, you could say that Ariane Space, which is the French conglomerate that exploits the Ariane missions, has more or less a share of 40% in the commercial market for big satellites. But that was before the 22, and when the problems of Ariane 6 arose.
Yes, exactly. That's the point I wanted to get to. The European Space Agency has faced numerous issues in the past few years, and its director does not make a secret of it. This is how Joseph Aschbacher commented on the situation at the Paris Air Forum.
So we had really, I would say, everything that could go wrong within a short period of time went really wrong on the launcher side.
What was he referring to exactly?
Yeah, you refer to the year of 2022, which was a real disaster year for European space. As I said, Russia invaded Ukraine in February of that year. That meant that the program between Europe and Russia, in which they chartered Soyuz rockets for missions from French Guiana, had to end immediately because of the sanctions. So the Russians they left the French Guiana, they even left some rockets there. But then also the delays with the current Ariane 6 program arose. And then in the end of that year, as it was not enough yet, there was this failure of the launch of a Vega C rocket, which is a smaller, lighter rocket. And that meant that also this rocket was compromised. So several circumstances led to really a horrible year for ESA, for European space in 22. So that's what he meant. So it was the start of the launch crisis, like Josef Aschbacher, head of ESA, described early in 23.
As you mentioned, Ariane 6 launch was delayed for quite some time. We're now 4 years behind schedule, which means that the Russian invasion cannot be the whole picture. What are the other reasons behind the delay?
Yeah, it was aimed to be launched in 2020, and now we're on 24. So it's a big project, and like you know, big projects usually have delays, especially in Europe, but not only here in the US too. Remember that NASA had a lot of delay with its SLS rocket, and the SpaceX even is now having delays with its Starship development. But in Europe, yeah, there were several issues. Of course, we had the COVID-19 pandemic. There were also some technical issues in control systems used for testing the rocket stages, for filling them with fuel, for example, and that delayed several important tests. And these tests need to be done before you can launch anything. So that's also where some delay came from. And then there were also small adaptations to the design. So
And how expensive was the entire project?
yeah, the overall price of the entire development of the Ariane 6 is, if I'm not wrong, 4 billion euro, which is also, of course, not nothing.
There's different types of actors involved in the space economy. We have NASA, ESA, and of course, SpaceX. Could you clarify the difference between them and how SpaceX has gotten ahead of ESA?
Because ESA, of course, is a space agency like NASA. SpaceX is a company that builds rockets and delivers launch services and transport services for clients like ESA and NASA.
Yeah.
But of course, SpaceX benefits from a lot from its development of the partly reusable rocket, which allows them to keep launch costs quite low for clients. Companies like Ariane Space, so the European rocket builders, you can say, they probably made the mistake not to bet on reusability for Ariane 6. So they're a bit running behind of this crucial development. And if the decision to build the Ariane 6 was made a bit later than 2014 when it was made, they might have decided differently. You could say, because it was in the middle of the previous decade that SpaceX was demonstrating the reusability. So maybe if they would have waited a bit, then they would have bet on reusability. But of course, they don't have that now, and SpaceX can offer cheaper launches to its clients because of this.
In fact, one of its clients is going to be exceptionally a European agency, EUMETSAT, the European Organization for the Exploitation of Meteorological Satellites, which said a few days ago that it will contract SpaceX main rocket, Falcon 9, instead of waiting for Ariane 6. What does that say really about the Ariane Space Company?
Yeah, that really came as an unpleasant surprise now, because we're counting down to the launch on Tuesday, 9th of July. So that EUMETSAT has now decided to fly one of its next satellites on a Falcon 9 and not on an Ariane 6, which would be the case until now. This is really like a thunder in a clear sky for European space. Also, it's a very bad timing to make this public now, just before Ariane 6 is about to leave. But I think European space is probably hoping that this will be an isolated incident and that the next satellites of EUMETSAT will fly again on Ariane 6. But it makes clear that in Europe there is still some division, that not everybody is looking in the same direction. Maybe Europe needs a bit more and stronger coordination of its space activities, because EUMETSAT, of course, are they, they manage satellites that are developed, built with public European money. And then it makes sense to fly them to space with rockets that are also paid by European money. Otherwise, why would we build these rockets at all? But of course, in a more and more competitive world market, launch market, these European rockets should also compete with rockets from SpaceX. So it's not very clear all, but it makes sense to have some kind of fly European policy in the coming years.
And comparing Ariane 6 to Falcon 9, would you say that the European built rocket is competitive against its American counterpart?
Yeah, so the Falcon 9 is partly reusable, and the Ariane 6 is not. It's expendable. And so this means Ariane 6 is cannot be as cheap as a launch, cannot be as cheap as one with the Falcon 9. It is much cheaper than the Ariane 5, its predecessor, but Falcon 9 will be a bit more cheap than the Ariane 6, mainly because of this reusability aspect.
Right. Because of the war in Ukraine and other issues, Europe has found itself without a way to independently launch heavy missions into space for about a year. Do you think that could happen in the future, or has the EU learned from its mistakes?
I don't have a crystal ball, of course, and few people saw the invasion of Russia coming in Ukraine. So
Right.
I don't know what will happen in the coming years and decades. But I think Europe has learned a lesson now, not to become too dependent of other big nations in space, also of the Americans. Also, for example, in manned space, they have started to fund companies to develop transport vehicles that can go to the ISS, and also in the long run take humans there. So that also on that field they're trying to become more autonomous. The past years have been a hard but a necessary lesson for European space to follow the path of more autonomy for this guaranteed access to space, both for transport of unmanned spacecraft and in the long run also for humans.
Thank you, Senne. I'm Giada Santana, and this was Euractivist Today in the EU podcast. Visit Euractiv to stay on top of the latest news, sign up for our podcast newsletter, and if you haven't subscribed yet, you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever it is that you get your podcasts. Leave us a star review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite streaming platform. It will really help us spread the word about our work. This episode was produced by Miriam Sanz de Tejada, Nicoletta Yonta, and me. Additional reporting by Nathan Kenes and Paul Mesed. As part of our commitment to accuracy, inclusion, and transparency, Euractiv is part of the Trust Project.